Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Davis. I'm back with Mental Health Chats. And today I would like to welcome Tommy Dahlborg. Hello, Tommy. How are you going?
Claire, I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me. And
Mm,
Tommy is going to be speaking to us about where does anxiety come from. So
mm,
before we go into that, Tommy, I just would like you to tell everyone where you are this evening or
mm.
today.
I am out in Portland, Maine, so on the other side of the water.
Excellent. On the other side of the pond. Brilliant.
Yes.
So, Tommy, I'm really, really happy to have you here because you're really going to open up about anxiety and your experience of anxiety and how
Mm,
you have helped yourself. So,
mm,
would you mind just briefly telling us your story?
mm. Absolutely, I would love to. So, to start off, I'll say, man, I've lived with anxiety my entire life. When I look back on my years, I'm like, I don't know if I can think of a day where I haven't felt at least a little inkling of anxiety. And so I remember when I was in seventh grade, and I know the school systems work different in the UK versus America. So I was probably 12 or 13 years old when I had the first conversation ever where I told somebody, "Hey, I think I'm anxious." And I remember their response to me being incredibly well intentioned and loving, and they said, "Tommy, don't worry about it. It's all just in your head." And
Yeah.
so immediately my feelings weren't necessarily validated, right? um so I kind of walked away from that conversation thinking, oh, this anxiety thing, it's not real. It's my brain's just playing tricks on me. As time went on, I continued to push this anxiety down and down, deeper and deeper, until I'm a senior at college. I'm about 21 years old at this point, so 8 or 9 years later, and my anxiety is through the roof. It This was the first time where I had physical symptoms of my anxiety. My hands were constantly trembling. I was having a difficult time sleeping. Sometimes I'd have stomach aches. It was more intense than it had ever been. And I was really struggling, and I was in so much pain that I decided to open up for probably the second time in my life about my anxiety. So I spoke to my then girlfriend. I shared with her how I was feeling, what some of the thoughts going through my head were, what some of those physical sensations were. And it was a really beautiful moment because when I opened up about some of these things, I got to learn an entirely different side of her. She shared with me that years earlier she had actually struggled with anxiety quite a lot herself. She
Mm.
ended up going to see a psychiatrist and was now on medication for her anxiety. And that conversation essentially gave me, in air quotes, permission to feel like I can go and seek out professional help too. Maybe that's not a weird thing. Maybe it's okay to do that. And so that's what I did. I went, I saw a psychiatrist, and I started to learn more about the brain from an evolutionary perspective, but also my brain in particular, why it was treating certain thoughts the way it was. I ended up learning that I have OCD. And so when I learned I had OCD, and that was a lot, not all of the source, but a lot of the source of my intense anxiety, I was able to really take action and figure out some things and some methods that I could use to help my anxiety. And as time went on, I wanted to help other people who were in a similar position as me, but I wasn't sure how because I went to school for finance, not social work or psychology. But the way it ended up was I truly, from experience, had started or had believed in the power of story and the power of vulnerability. And so I wanted to use a platform to share my story and allow other people to hear other people's stories. And so now I host a podcast called Strength Through Vulnerability. We talk about all this stuff. And it's been a really fun journey so far.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us, Tommy. Can you go into a bit more detail of where do you believe your anxiety came from?
Mm, absolutely. And, I think there are three places where I think it comes from in particular. And it's probably unique to every single person out there. But for me, I would say there's the general anxiety of the unknown, the uncontrollable, that anxiety you feel when you think about your finances or what your future is going to look like. Any anxiety you feel from not being in this present moment. I think that that's something that every single person out there has experienced for the most part. So I definitely experienced that kind of anxiety. I also think that so much of it is derived from when we were children. A lot of the experiences that I had, like being bullied, made fun of for my weight. I grew up as a really heavy kid. Those kinds of experiences, for people who maybe were sexually abused as a child, like those traumatic, my dad uses this term called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Those things absolutely contribute to the anxiety that you feel. I think, for example, myself, let's go to the weight issue, right? So I was bullied a lot as a kid for being a bigger kid. And so now even though I've lost a lot of weight, there continues to be this little bit of social anxiety surrounding how I look. What do people think of how I look? Do I look fat in this? Like all those questions that a lot of people probably struggle with. And those insecurities, that anxiety was driven by stories I was told as a kid, right? About who I am. My voice is cracked. I swear I've already been through puberty. But in addition to all of that, a lot of my anxiety comes from my OCD too. And that was something that I didn't know of for a really long time. And I think that OCD is something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, and it's to no fault of their own. I think when we think of OCD, often we imagine, excessive hand washing or the desire for things to be neat and orderly. Those are kind of like stereotypical traits of OCD, but it's so much deeper than that. And I really, one of the things I love to focus on my podcast is breaking down what OCD actually is. And a lot of what OCD is there are these things called intrusive thoughts. Basically these scary, uncomfortable thoughts that nobody wants to have, but about 80% of people do have. It can be something from the fear of something happening to your family. It could be the fear of like you might lose control of your sense and you might cause somebody to be hurt. A bunch of scary thoughts in that realm. And for people with OCD, they really can latch on to these intrusive thoughts because our brains treat them as a true threat. And so when we latch onto those thoughts, when we lock in and obsess over those thoughts, we're ruminating, trying to rationalize why we wouldn't do whatever that thought is saying we would do or could do. And it causes intense amounts of anxiety because it makes you question who you are as a person, what your values really are. And that's what that stress and anxiety is what leads to people with OCD to do the compulsions, whether that's the hand washing. Mental compulsions would be the ruminating, the constant thinking, overanalyzing. And there are a myriad of other compulsions out there. But that's definitely been a really large source of my anxiety too. And I love to educate people on that so that they have a better understanding of what OCD is.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into loads and loads of detail, but thank you. You've really made that clear. And anxiety for different people would come from different sources. So
absolutely.
It's great to hear your examples there. So, Tommy, what have you done to help yourself over the years with regards to your anxiety?
Man, it's a really good question. And it's been a lot of different things. I think the number one thing I mentioned earlier is I've really come to believe in and adopt vulnerability. The power of having a conversation with somebody, especially when it comes to taboo or scary topics like this, is you have these conversations with someone you love and you trust, right? The first person that I reached out to about how I was feeling was my girlfriend. And then I talked to my parents, and then I went and saw a psychiatrist. And me taking the initiative to have those conversations for the benefit of myself was huge. So that's one really big thing. Another thing is, and you hear this a lot, is journaling. Sometimes there's so many things going on in our minds. It can be so helpful to get it down on paper. It's like you're almost transmitting it from here, and like now it's out of your head and down on this little journal right here, you know. Very much believe in the power of that. My podcast, getting to share my story and also talk to other people about their stories, is therapeutic for me. It's constant encouragement and a reminder of you are not alone. And that's the message that I really want to share with people is whatever you're going through, you're not the only one. You're not the first one. There are absolutely other people out there, and you can get better. So those are a few things. And for those listeners out there who think maybe they have OCD or they know they have OCD, one thing that really helped me was I heard this gentleman once say, you know, your body poops, but you don't believe that you're poop. And I was like, where's this guy going? And then he said, your body or your brain produces thoughts, but you're not just your thoughts. You're so much more than that. So if you are struggling with OCD, with these intrusive thoughts, and you're wondering what they say about you, a lot of times they're actually not saying anything about you. They're just a random thought that your brain fired off. And we need to, and one thing that I constantly practice is accepting my thoughts for what they are. Simply just thoughts.
That's a really, really good point, Tommy. Thank you for that. And it's very interesting hearing the way what you do to help yourself. And everybody that I've had on the mental health chats has got different methods to help themselves and heal themselves. So it's all about what can we do individually to help ourselves? What would suit me? And that actually goes on to our next guest, who is a fellow called 𝗬𝗵𝗆𝗀𝗆, who is going to be talking about how physical activity has helped him with his anxiety. So I'm looking forward to our next guest. But before we go on to that, where can people actually find you, Tommy, if people would like some advice, or you mentioned your podcast? Could you please just let everybody know how people can find you to get in contact?
Would love to, Claire. Thank you for the opportunity. So my podcast is called the Strength Through Vulnerability Podcast. You can find me on any major podcast platform out there. And just a note, through is spelled THRU. I also have a website, strengththrough.com, through again, spelled THRU. You can also find me on Instagram at Strength Through Vulnerability. And also my personal one is at Tommy Dahlborg Jr., which if you want the spelling, I'm sure Claire will have my name in the title of this. So hopefully that'll help.
Yes, it is in the title. And I'll be putting all of those links into the comments. So people
Thank you, Claire.
Connect on those comments. So our next guest, as I mentioned, is 𝗬𝗵𝗆𝗀𝗆𝗀𝗆, another person from the US. We've got a couple of US guests this time. I'm very excited, but a different city. He's from Chicago. So thank you so much, Tommy, for joining us. And I'm looking forward to continuing this journey of talking about anxiety and how we can help other people. So take care, Tommy, and thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Claire. It's a pleasure to talk to you. You take care as well.
Yeah, take care. Bye.